Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, our recent Pew Research Center survey found that nearly a third of American adults have a tattoo, and almost a quarter of them have more than one. So, today I'd like to look at some things to consider when deciding on a tattoo, right? What risks are there when getting a tattoo, and how should you take care of it if you do decide to get one? So, joining me today to discuss these issues is Adam Friedman, MD. Dr. Friedman is a professor and the chair of dermatology at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Dr. Friedman, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. So, let's start out with from a dermatologist perspective. All these questions will be from a dermatologist perspective. What are the risks to consider before getting a tattoo?
Right. So when you think about a tattoo, what in essence are you doing here? You are placing a foreign material into parts of your skin that is not constantly turning over and pushing things out. Our skin is comprised of several different layers, three main layers, and the pigment that is being used to make whatever that innovative structure or character that artist is putting on your skin, it's meant to stay and stay permanently. So I think that that's really an important point. And along those lines, I also want to highlight that while, yes, there are ways to remove tattoos, there are various procedures, predominantly a laser or light-based procedures to remove tattoos. You will always have something there. I can distinctly remember there was a Simpsons episode where Bart thought it'd be so cool to get a tattoo. And then, of course, he gets it and they go and get it removed. And magically, his skin is clear. That is not the case. So it is a permanent change that you are making to your skin one way or another. And so I think that has to be considered in terms of this is going to be a partner for life. Aside from that, then we think about, well, what are the risks of doing a procedure where you are pushing this pigment, you're making breaks in the skin, you're creating little microscopic wounds over and over again. What is the potential risk of doing that, even from an acute, meaning immediate standpoint, but then also things that can evolve over time. And so certainly we think about, acute bacterial infections from whether it be when the procedure was done, if it wasn't done in a sterile fashion, or more often than not, actually the care of that tattoo afterwards, being that the armor, our skin barrier, is disrupted from that procedure, and this wound has to heal. But then I think from a more indolent and kind of delayed perspective of what can come down the road, there are a couple buckets we can think about. I think most notable would be deep fungal infections. So these are fungi that are contaminants that this has been well described in the literature and even gets some media attention, that they come along for the ride and they grow very slowly in the skin. And ultimately you could see changes or rashes that can occur months after the tattoo. But actually a more recent paper found that, and this is probably owing to maybe the lack of really strong oversight of various manufacturing practices for tattoo ink, that one organization found that there was contaminants of multiple different types of bacteria in these inks. So certainly quality assurance is important, and who you go to get your tattoo is very important. But the infection issues can be immediate, but they also can be delayed. Then on the flip side, away from infection, because that's, I think, some of the more scary stuff, we know that tattoos, the ink itself can be allergenic. It could cause an allergic contact dermatitis. And there's sadly no way to predict that. And each pigment, each ink comes from a different source. And so some people can only be allergic to red dye or green dye. And red is actually one of the more common ones. And so you can get a very itchy, recurring rash in the areas of that specific pigment. And then also, I think something to consider is primary skin conditions, psoriasis, lichen planus, and others. From the injury of getting that tattoo, it can wake up that skin condition, and people can get certain skin rashes, even sarcoidosis, within a tattoo due to A, the injury of getting it, or B, the presence of a foreign material. I'm not trying to scare anyone here. I'm not going to be the bad guy. I'm like, oh, don't get tattoos. I think certainly it's a very unique decision and a personal decision, but I think everyone needs to be educated of the potential risks that can come along with doing so.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed you didn't mention was the bloodborne pathogens hepatitis, HIV. Is that, did you not mention it because is that not much of a concern anymore these days? Or
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe it's me being an optimist, but I would hope that that would not be an issue in terms of proper sterilization, using autoclaves and ways to really make sure that the tools are completely sterilized between each participant, each customer, so to speak.
right.
But no, a little outside of my wheels, but I'm not aware of that being such a major issue. But yes, theoretically, given the depth of the needle, given that this is going to the level where the blood vessels are, there would be potential to transmit bloodborne illnesses
Mhm.
if proper technique and proper care was not taken to make sure that the tools are sterilized.
So, in the source of the bacterial and the fungal infections, that could be the ink or the needles or a
Yeah, you
combination of both.
usually it's the ink,
Yeah.
especially when it comes from some of these, as an academic dermatologist, atypical mycobacterial infections and
Mhm.
tattoo, we salivate like, oh, that's so interesting, and it's hopefully relatively rare.
Mhm.
But in terms of those types of infections, it's really a contamination of the ink. When it comes to your point, the actual procedure, that would be more related to not necessarily prepping the field. So, for example, our skin is home to over 500 plus bacteria, forgetting even fungi and viruses. We are walking petri dishes, and together we're a super organism. This is not a bad thing. This is a good thing.
Mhm.
However, people need to recognize that when these various microbial players aren't where they belong. If they're not playing the sandbox correctly or they're going outside their lane, like going deeper into the skin where they're not meant to be, that's when infection can emerge. So not properly sterilizing the skin and using good practices to ensure that you are limiting infection and pushing bacteria where it doesn't belong, that certainly can lead to problems.
Yeah. Now, do the risk increase with the size of the tattoo?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that depending on which thing we're talking about, the answer could be yes. So, if we're talking about a broader surface area, that means that is more injury to the skin, more little micro breaks into the skin that require healing. And realize the more injury you impart to the skin, the more energy, the more effort is needed to heal, and the more, the greater metabolic burden in terms of how much energy the body needs. Um, I think also that's more surface area for opportunities to go wrong in terms of things entering the skin. So I think it's like asking, is there more risk with a small or a big wound? I would say, sure, a larger wound, there is more surface area for things to go in the wrong direction. I think the other thing to mention when you think of broader tattoos, while there isn't a lot of consensus on a lot of the things we are and we'll talk about, I think certain things are useful to consider. One, we don't want, especially broad tattoos, over areas where there are lots of moles, because that can make it difficult to monitor for change over time, looking for the signs that could potentially suggest that something's turning cancerous.
Right.
I think certainly areas that are sun exposed, we know that areas that are sun exposed, the sun, if we don't protect ourselves from ultraviolet radiation, that can accelerate the aging of the skin, the appearance and stability of the skin. So that will augment the appearance of a tattoo. So something also to consider when it comes to placement and the size.
Now, tattoos are put all over the body on some people. Are there certain areas you should avoid though, more than
Yeah,
others?
yeah. It's a good question. I think, and this is thinking outside of the box in terms of how location matters. When we get further away from the center of the body, so to speak, you're getting to the, distal parts of the legs. Those areas tend to heal slower because whether it be gravity fighting against you in terms of, blood needing to get back to the heart and circulation, or the ability of all the good things that the skin needs in order to heal, for example, or the likelihood for injury, sun exposure, or even the skin drying out. So areas that are going to be more prone to these issues probably will not maintain the integrity of a tattoo as well as sun protected truncal or more central areas. But as far as I can think of, there's no one area that I think would be extraordinarily concerning, short of, are you obscuring something on the skin that needs to be followed for quality and safety to make sure it doesn't turn anything cancerous.
Yeah. So I guess the answer to this would be go to an appropriately regulated tattoo place. That's the best way to reduce the risk of infection, I imagine, right?
Yeah, and to that end, what does that even look like? I was doing some of my own research, and actually, only 7 states require tattoo artists to even provide specific aftercare information. So I think that there is a lot of variability in that quality. So I think to the question of what do you need to consider before getting a tattoo, also do your homework on various tattoo parlors. I think if you have colleagues, friends, family who have tattoos and have had different experiences, I think certainly being a savvy shopper is really important. But as far as I'm aware, and maybe this is a good call to action, I'm not aware of, a centralized repository of, a list of, those businesses that follow good practices or get recognized for quality assurance. And I think certainly if it doesn't exist, I just don't know offhand. Something like that, I think, would actually be very helpful, given to your point, the number of people who want and seek out tattoos.
Yeah. And you mentioned aftercare. Can you go over for the audience, if you do decide to get one, what should you do to make sure that you can reduce your risk of scar tissue or infections or whatever it takes?
Yeah, so I think this is probably the area of the greatest need. There was actually a publication that came out in 2023 by one of my colleagues and friends, Rhonda Farah, out of Minnesota, that surveyed 900 different tattoo artists to see what were their recommendations. And the consistency was next to none. And even looking at what my colleagues have stated in the media related to what should you be doing, it's all over the map. So I think that question is the $1 million question, that we do need evidence-based guidelines of best practices afterwards. I think one of the areas that has the greatest kind of divisiveness is the use of petrolatum-based or petroleum jelly-based products. So as I mentioned before, you are creating tons of little micro wounds in the skin. And when we think about wound healing, there are some very basic and simple rules that will enhance the acceleration of wound healing, which is keeping something covered and keeping it moist and hydrated. And there's a lot of scientific evidence supporting that. So when you think about that, well, what is going to be occlusive and maintain water in the skin? Well, things that are thicker, things that are ointment based, like petrolatum. And so depending on what source you go to, some say, yes, that's great, put it on. It will limit scabbing, crusting, scaling, which we do not want happening. Scabs, which often people say, oh, it's a sign of healthy healing. That's great. No, 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 no. A scab is an impediment. It is a boulder in the middle of a road, and that road wants to come together. However, and what I think may be somewhat consistent that's out there, there is some suggestion and evidence that maybe petrolatum or petroleum jelly may dilute the intensity of the color. It may dilute some of the pigment. I don't know how validated that is, because there have been some clinical trials, even recently, one published, showing that there was no difference in using a petroleum jelly containing moisturizer versus one that didn't have it. So the jury is still out, but that's where I see a lot of the confusion of, should you use something like Vaseline or not, from an infection risk standpoint, which I don't think there would be any issue whatsoever, by the way, but from a quality of the tattoo and longevity of tattoo, that I don't know. The good news is we have plenty of other options. If when there is some debate of what to do, I think the answer is go where there is no debate. So I think using creams, and what a cream versus an ointment is, it's defined by the amount of water that's in it. An ointment has no water. A cream is a mix of water and fats and oils and things like that. From a wound healing acceleration perspective, products that contain colloidal oatmeal, which has a mix of antioxidants called avenanthramides, oat oil, which actually activates certain things inside skin cells that help them turn over and repair faster. These products all will say for eczema on them. That is an FDA designation in the over-the-counter monograph, drug monograph, that if something says it's for eczema, it has to have, I believe, at least 2% colloidal in there. So it's a moisturizer, which, by the way, you want to apply on damp skin. And it has things in it that might help heal a little bit faster. So from the perspective of what do you put on it down the road, I would recommend something in that category, in addition to using sun protection, SPF 30 or higher in broad spectrum, if it's a sun exposed area when you're outdoors. Now, rewinding to moment of, you get your tattoo, what happens there? It is variable depending on where you are, but there is a particular type of dressing called Tegaderm. This is a film dressing that is somewhat permeable, meaning air can go in and out, and it's see-through. So you actually can see what's going on underneath. That is sometimes employed. I've even seen people just wrap it in Saran wrap, which I guess in essence does the same thing. However, while we want to keep moisture in, we do need a little bit to escape. We need about 1% of water from the skin to escape, or else the skin can kind of macerate, meaning kind of get mushy and wrinkly, which we do not want. So the general kind of rule is whatever dressing they put on, you want to leave it on, whether it be a day or 24 hours, or if it's Tegaderm, you can leave that on for about 2 to 3 days. You want to remove it, and then you want to be very, very gentle, because once again, you have all these little micro wounds. So anytime you're going to be handling the area, make sure you wash your hands with soap and water. And I do recommend an antibacterial wash. And this is not one of those, put it on and 5 seconds later. No. We really want you to wash your hands. You want to wash gently. Some do recommend an antibacterial wash as well. They could be a little more drying. So make sure that as soon as you're done washing, you're going to put that moisturizer on damp skin immediately afterwards. And this is true of so many inflammatory things. Do not pick, do not poke, do not pull the dead skin off or the scale or scabs. That will only create more inflammation and delay healing. The best thing you could do is, if you see those attributes, is facilitate the skin's natural way to exfoliate. And I realize my fingers weren't in the frame. So to exfoliate, our skin is constantly turning over, and it needs a little bit of water to do so. Applying a moisturizer to damp skin will actually help the skin exfoliate and remove those things, versus picking, prodding, or using physical exfoliants like loofah, which I would not recommend doing.
Yeah. Just a curiosity, when I was thinking about doing this topic, how frequently do your patients come to you as a dermatologist and consult you on whether they should get a tattoo or not? Does that even exist?
Yeah, let me think. Carry the one. Never. Absolutely
Yeah,
never. When
yeah.
I see, when I see them, I'm seeing them because of complications. So I have everything I mentioned. I have patients who have allergic contact dermatitis to tattoo ink. And that is really tricky, because as long as that pigment's there, it's going to keep setting off the immune reaction to create that eczema-like rash. We can use topical steroids, injections of steroids, but unless you remove the tattoo ink with laser, it's going to keep happening. I've seen psoriasis, lichen planus, sarcoidosis emerging in tattoos. Actually, sarcoidosis is a great example of getting those balls of inflammation called granulomas in tattoos. And then I've even seen complications like infections, like atypical microbacterial infections, which are tough to not only diagnose and know which one you're dealing with, but also to actually treat with long-term oral antibiotics.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Dr. Friedman, any final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think that if you are going to permanently change your skin, regardless of what you do down the road, there's going to be some permanence here. Think it through, make good decisions, but also, as part of this permanence, just like if you get, a haircut, or you get something and you're going to do things to maintain it and ensure that you're getting the most out of your money and investment, simple things can make a very big difference to limit how that investment changes and evolves over time, but also be mindful not to allow this change in your skin to put you at risk for other issues as well.
Good advice. I want to thank you, Dr. Adam Friedman, for sharing your time and expertise today. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Great to be here.